Hi everybody, my name is Jens Larsen. Most of the time when we are playing jazz music, we are performing songs. So learning and studying songs is something that's really at the core of playing jazz. And therefore it also makes sense to start thinking about what it actually takes and what you need to be able to do if you're learning a song. Because if you're clear on what the goals are, what you want to achieve, then it's also going to be easier for you to actually make sure that you know the songs and that you have something to study towards. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar, about improvising over chord changes, interesting arpeggios and chord voicings, then subscribe to my channel. If you want to make sure not to miss anything, then click the little bell notification icon next to the subscribe button. What I want to do with this video is to make sort of a checklist of things that you need to be able to do or that you want to be able to work towards when you're trying to study a song. With a lot of these things, they're not necessarily that difficult. They might sound really difficult and they might be difficult the first time you do it, but once you're used to working like this, it's actually not as difficult as you might think. For this video, I'm going to demonstrate some of the examples on a song, and I'm going to do that on Days of Wine and Roses. The reason for that is just because it's a song I know really well, and I also know that it kind of covers some of the different topics that I want to talk about through this video. The most important part of the song is the melody. Without the melody, there would be no chords, and probably then there wouldn't be any solos. So the melody is the foundation of everything, and even though in jazz we tend to sort of reduce the melody that we solo over to a chord progression that isn't really the melody but just some sort of reduced version of it, it's still the thing that we kind of hold on to. It's what keeps us on track, so that's what you hear in the back of your head when you're playing the song, and that's what's telling you where you are. So for that, it's extremely important that you check this out. When you're learning it on guitar, you're probably just first learning it in one position. Since I'm using Days of Wine and Roses, you will have one place where it's like, okay, this is where I know it. You want to play it everywhere on the neck. This idea that once you start moving it around, you start playing more from hearing the melody and then just finding the notes in another position. And this is something that's very useful for ear training and also just for really starting to have this connection between what you hear and what's coming out of your fingers. Stuff that you really want to be able to do anyway and you want to train. So for that reason, this exercise is really useful. For Days of Wine and Roses, so for this, and you want to check that out in as many places as you can. So on and so forth. You can find, oh, that's almost the same as the first one. Try to start somewhere. If you find the first note, if you know what note it starts on, and then go from there. Try and see if you can just hear what the melody is and see if you can play it. The first few times that's really difficult, and probably that's going to be the same for other instruments. If you want to try this in another register that's maybe not what you're used to, really essential that you just hammer the melody in there, because if you have that to rely on, you have such a strong foundation to build on. And it's also going to help you when, again, if you're playing the melody and you're playing with a band that you don't know and they're playing other changes, if you hear it against the melody, it's a lot easier to figure out what it is instead of just trying to hear what the chord is. And that's something that I've used quite a lot if I have to figure out what changes are being played behind me, because it might not be what I expect it to be. On guitar, you also want to be able to harmonize the melody. And the first thing you want to do is probably have some sort of set version of chord melody arrangement of the song. So for Days of Wine and Roses, that's probably what I often play, at least. But you want to be able to do this in other places, and you also, I think essentially, you want to be able to play your chord melody arrangements as open interpretations of the theme. So the way you play the theme is not going to be completely strictly with the rhythm, and the same goes for the harmony also. So you want to be able to use different voicings and have some sort of control over what kind of sound that you put under the melody and what you feel like doing today or right now when you're playing it. So that's one thing. And there again, if you know the melody in several positions or in several registers, then in this case, it's so low that I can't actually put a chord under it all the time. But still, you have the freedom to put chords around it, even if you're playing in this register. in that way, you can always just come up with new stuff and be a little bit more free with how you choose to harmonize the melody. And when you're playing, especially if you're playing in a band setting where you don't have to put down the bass note, you actually have a lot of freedom while playing the melody and choosing harmonizations. And being aware of this from the beginning is going to make it easier also. But you do need to be able to play the melody in different positions and have a really good overview of everywhere where it's found. Now that you know the melody, you start looking into what kind of chords you want to put under it. Here, it's probably useful to think about stuff like checking out the original chords, if you have access to the original version of the song, just to figure that out. And of course, there are going to be more or less famous versions of this song, and that will influence the kind of chords that are played. So maybe just to relate this to Days of Wine and Roses, I think probably two famous versions of this song for me would be, there's a Bill Evans version, which is harmonized in a certain way because what he does with it is he plays the first half of the song in F, and then he moves the second half up a minor third to A flat major. So that's one reharmonization that's quite common and that you probably want to be aware of, but usually that one will not sort of just get pulled on you in a session. The other one is, if I remember correctly, on the Oscar Peterson. The other version is from an Oscar Peterson version of Days of Wine and Roses, and that's one that I run into once in a while. I think it's from We Get Requests, but that's an album that I don't actually have, so I'm not sure. When I play the song, the last 4 bars of the first half would be. So sort of this chain where you have the 2/5 to the 6th degree, and then you get 5/5 and then the 2/5. On the Oscar Peterson version, and I hope I'm right about that being the Oscar Peterson version, at least it's something that's played quite often, and I think they got it from there. They go directly to the D minor, so, and then just a G7. So, of course, both of these things work. One is original, and one is not. And I don't know. I think this one is actually the original harmonization. At least it's the one I know as being most common. Also, the one that I think sounds better. But they both work, and it's just a question of taste and a question of what you want to do with it. That's going to decide if you like one more than the other. And with chords, that's really very often the case. And that's also why it's interesting to see how different people harmonize different parts of a song. I'm not really going to go into too many examples of different ways of harmonizing Days of Wine and Roses, just because that's not really what this is about. But the whole idea of just having a huge vocabulary of different ways of harmonizing certain melodies over certain chords in a key is actually really useful for this. And it's also almost an art unto itself, because that really becomes arranging and interpreting the song in a completely different way than just the way that you play the melody or the tempo. When you know the melody really well, and now you've figured out what chord changes you want to have under the melody, then we can start working on improvising over the song. I think the things I want to go over here are just things that I think you want to be able to do with any song you want to play. And maybe also just because I think those are sort of basic things that are always, whenever you do it, you're going to come up with something new, and you're also going to be challenging yourself to be a little bit more musical and play some better solos. And you're not just going to run all your tired licks or whatever you have in your fingers all the time. That's also important, I think. So for Days of Wine and Roses, I think one of the things, well, for any standard or any song really, you want to be able to play a solo pretty much in any position with only the basic chord notes. So that means just the basic 7th chord arpeggios. And of course there are going to be songs where that's not going to cover the harmony well enough, and if you work with certain types of harmony, that's not going to cut it. But for most standards and most jazz pieces, that will actually do. So that means that you just play simple solos and try to be musical, try to listen to how the harmony connects, and it's just an exercise in connecting the different chords, I think. So if I do that, let's do that here. So. So with an added flat 9 at the end here, that's possible to do in this position. And really, you just want to try this stuff out and work with it, mostly just because it's limiting you and it's forcing you to really connect with the song on a more deep level, I think. So that's at least one of the reasons why it's something that I return to very often, and it doesn't really matter if I'm working on All of Me or Giant Steps. But besides having these exercises where you're just doing simple things to really know the song and know how the harmony moves and how you get from one chord to the next, you probably also want to work on just checking out the different options you have available. So if you have reharmonizations, how can I use them? How can I introduce them? What can I come up with? Can I add passing chords in my solo? Stuff like that. And I'm not going to go into that too much with this, because it's not really about Days of Wine and Roses. It's more just a thing that you want to be aware of. These kind of things are important to check out. And of course, you want to be able to hear them at that point in the song. So those, you probably want to sort of just sit down and try and see if you can figure out what does it sound like. It often works really well to actually play them in the chords first, so you have an idea about, okay, if I play this, the chord that I want to use as a reharmonization in my solo, if I play it as a chord while I'm comping, I can hear what's going on, and that makes it easier for me to play a line and to hear that it makes sense what I'm doing. And of course, whenever you use a reharmonization like this, it shouldn't stand alone. So you kind of need to figure out a way to get in there and transition from the normal changes into the reharmonization and to get out again in a sort of logical way. I think that's also an important part of using tools like this. That was a few suggestions for a list of things that you need to be able to do, but at the same time, I think it's an interesting thing to discuss this, because I'm curious what you think are the essential things that you need to be able to do with a standard. I would hope that you also can start thinking about the fact that the chords that you know is only one set of chords, and that it's something that you can work with. In general, we want to be able to improvise not only with the lines that we play over the chords, but also just really with the chords themselves. So yeah, if you have any ideas or any things that you think, well, you need to work on this with a song, then let me know in the comments. I'm really curious to know this. I think it's a nice thing to start checking out. It's something that I'm certainly busy with myself a lot. You want to be good at learning songs, and you also want to find the best possible ways to really internalize the material of a song so that you can use it and be as free as possible on it. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar and this is the first time you see one of my videos, then subscribe to my channel. The weekly videos that I publish on this channel are all about finding solid methods and good strategies for you to improve as a jazz guitar player. If you want to help me keep making videos, then check out my Patreon page. I'm very grateful for the support that I'm getting from my patrons, and it's because of their support that I can keep on making videos every week. If you join us over on Patreon, then I can also give you something in return for your support. That's about it for this time. Thank you for watching, and until next time.